as a car guy, I think I know everything. Yes, I'm a bit of a know-it-all. And in this automotive space, it is very few cars that I probably have not heard of or looked into. But as I was talking to one of my good friends, Angelina, shout out to her, she asked me about the MG Midget and had I ever heard of it. And of course, I'm a bit ashamed to say that I didn't hear about this, but that's the beauty of research. You find out, right? So I happened to be looking in, and then what I really discovered was that low-key, MG laid out the blueprint for Mazda. And so if you know anything about the Miata is a fun, light, two-seater sports car or sporty car, however you want to say that. And it is the quintessential fun package for anybody that just really wants to rip it to the road. And so the MG Midget, as I happen to be looking back into its history, is actually one of the first to do it. And so with that being said, I want to take a deep dive and give the MG Midget its flowers because I think that it needs to be talked about and talked about again. There are several videos about this, but we ain't them videos. So with that being said, stick around and stay tuned because you are now watching The Breakdown. So getting into it, the MG Midget is kind of like, I'll say it this way. The MG Midget has its own unique qualifiers of what sporty is. Starting back in 1924 with Mr. William Morris and associate Cecil Kimber, who played an essential role in establishing MG as a brand. The Midget car was revived after the first moniker seeing the MG M-Type Midget of the late 1920s. And so the Midget would be the first of its kind, so to speak, of being light, fun, and affordable sportiness. MG is a British brand, and so that's probably one of the reasons why you probably never heard of it if you are in the States. It was basically founded as a way of creating more sporty and affordable vehicles. The cool thing about the British and the Germans is that they really appreciate the art of driving. Here in America, we take that a bit for granted. I think it's because it's a little monotonous, and of course, we don't want to go to our day jobs, which gets a little aggy, and that's a whole different conversation. But it's nothing short of making driving fun. And when I was looking into the MG Midget, what I noticed was that it was a two-seater lightweight sports car, and it was produced from 1961 to 1979. And so there were two generations, and there is the MG Midget. There is also the MGB, which is a bit different. And the MGB is slightly longer and slightly more roomier than the MG Midget. And think of it as a 2 Series versus a 4 Series. The 2 Series, if you don't know anything about BMW, is really true to driving potential, whereas the 4 Series gives you a little more comfort over driving. So the MG Midget is kind of the predecessor to the Mazda Miata. The first Mazda Miata was created back in 1991, but this was 30 years prior. So the MG Midget is not slightly, it is very much smaller.
No one would make that connection.
Oh my gosh, shut the f up. While the MG Midget is not as known, it laid out the blueprint for being small and fun. The Mazda Miata, unlike the MG Midget, is much bigger and much wider. The Mazda Miata is much more practical than the MG Midget, but that doesn't mean that the MG Midget wasn't fun. While it is 21.3 inches longer and 14.7 inches wider than the Midget, the Miata is a bit more practical and a lot more fun. And of course, we all attribute that to lightweight and fun reliability, but there is a huge difference in the styling as well as just the overall simplicity of the Midget versus the Miata, because the Miata, especially nowadays, is a little more complex. Not too complex, but much more complex. But the Midget was one of the coolest things you could get back in the 60s and 70s, right before it was discontinued in the second iteration. But unlike the Miata, the Midget is kind of the first time we've really seen what fun is without the power. Announced back in June of 1961, the Midget was supposed to be a more expensive version of the Austin Healey Sprite Deluxe version of the Mark II, which essentially would be considered to be the Frog-eyed Sprite. So the Midget came with a 1.2 liter engine. It was mechanically identical to its counterparts. The Midget was supposed to be a little more umped up. Now, unlike the Mazda and unlike the Austin Healey, the Midget came just right. It was kind of the first time we had seen fun. Now, of course, remember back in the day, the cars did not have horsepower. There was a reason why they called certain cars muscle cars and everything else was just that. And so the Midget was kind of the more unseen first time next to the big luxury sports coupes back in the day, this was kind of the first time we had seen something fun and not exactly overwhelming. Now, the one thing that I did like about the Midget was that I learned that it was also the detuned version of the Mini Cooper S, which a lot of enthusiasts were upset about that. You got to remember, for a lot of this information, it is incredibly difficult to find. So if I make a mistake and I get a fact wrong, please let me know in the comments below, because this was very hard to find any type of information on if it wasn't some type of MG owners clubs, but that's here or there. So the Midget did boast a 4-cylinder engine, and it was a 1.5, giving it 65 brake horsepower and 77 pound-feet of torque. Unlike the 1.2, the 1.5 is kind of the one that gave just enough oomph. Even though it wasn't overwhelming, it still gave a significant bump in torque, but the 4-speed transmission was linked to a synchro mesh gearbox, and it was absolutely a hoot to drive. I mean, I've never driven one, but in all of the sporty cars I've driven, I have learned that horsepower doesn't necessarily always equal fun. And so we see that in a lot of cars like Toyota, we see that in a lot of cars like Honda, we see that in a lot of cars like even, hell, Chevy. I give them that. I give them that. You don't give them that? I give them that. Yeah. So even though the Miata was able to get a 0 to 60 of 9.2 seconds when it first debuted, the Midget was not getting that. The Midget was getting a whopping 12.3 seconds, 0 to 60, and had a maximum miles per hour of 101 miles per hour. But granted, even still, it still offered plenty of thrills and frills for virtually nothing. Now, a good thing that I recognize about researching this is that a lot of people absolutely adored its simplicity. There are many car enthusiasts who have said that this is one of the cars that they have learned to work on. Because of its simplicity, it also made it more reliable. And unfortunately, there aren't many found, obviously, because this is a much rare car and MG is not popular in the States. But unlike the Miata, this was the one that really laid the blueprint. And if you really look at the overall specs between the two, the Miata has never actually been a fast car. It's always been fun. It's always been engaging. The handling is what truly made the Miata what it is. And the same could be said about the Midget. Many of the enthusiasts who have driven this car always love and adore its basically open air cabin, and it allows them to be free in a way that many cars could not replicate, especially during that time frame. Now, I will say from a reception space, a lot of people knew that the Midget was kind of like a badge engineer copy, but there's a lot of people who absolutely adore and love that car. Unlike the Mazda Miata, which was basically kind of its first of its kind, the Miata sold significantly better. It sold significantly better than the Midget, partly because Mazda had kind of made a bigger name for itself than the MG. And so when Mazda came to the States, they had several things. The first Mazda to come in roughly around the same time was the Mazda R100 Coupe. And so that is really kind of where they kind of saw themselves really push back in the American markets. And the other thing is that unlike Mazda, the MG had already had its place. And as we begin to get more fuel regulations and more EPA, which kind of destroyed the MG brand, is where we also see the Japanese takeover, and we begin to see your Hondas and Toyotas and Mazdas take over. And that is a critical piece in why the MG brand did not succeed as well as the Mazda brand has, is partly because it was just simply bad timing. But by comparison, the MG was significantly cheaper as opposed to the Miata. Quite as it's kept, Miatas ain't cheap. They're affordable, but they ain't cheap. The Midget made the formula that the Miata followed, which was essentially create a small, lightweight, affordable, rear-wheel drive front-engine sports car, or sporty car, because these are not sports cars, because they're sporty cars.
I can never really understand the difference of why we say that, but sure, Jan, why not?
But overall, I really could not understand why the MG was discontinued, but that's my theory. It's just that the gas crisis of 1973 essentially ruined any prior brands, and any incoming brands after that would be much more successful because they would have the regulations on hand to be able to operate themselves as companies. But all things aside, the Midget really explored, for a lot of enthusiasts, simplicity, reliability, and fun. And that is a critical formula whenever you're making a overall enthusiast car. Now, this was a enthusiast dream if you are expecting to get one on the market, but they're incredibly difficult to find. I was taking a look, and according to the Hagerty valuation guide, even at really good models, you can find one for about 3,600 euros, which is roughly about $3,900 in the United States. That's on a really poor looking one, and they can go anywhere up to 10,800 euros if you're just really looking for a really good one. And a lot of restoration projects exist, so a lot of people who are looking for them usually take up the ones that are in the junkyards. And overall, between the MGB and the Midget, they're incredibly difficult to find, but if you can find one and you can find the parts, because also the parts in comparison to a lot of the other cars that have kind of failed along the wayside, the MG apparently has a huge aftermarket parts configuration, and so you can really find a really good array of parts for this car. The similarities between the Midget and the Miata are almost uncanny, and it's quite unfortunate because the Miata has seen so much success, and a lot of people would love a good alternative to the Miata, and so there's a reason why that still reigns king. But the Miata would not be what it is today without the Midget, and so I want to give the Midget its flowers, because it seems as though in doing some level of research, maybe not intense research, but just enough to really understand what the Midget was, from the 1.5 liter engine to the small rear wheel drive fun compactness of it and its parts availability, I would say that this is a really good bargain if you can find one, and you can find one worth working on. And like I said, many people have worked on them, and that's how they learn to work on cars. But I mean, all things aside, I think that the Miata is kind of in its own lane. It's very much the only child syndrome, and unfortunately there is really no way that we can really dethrone the Miata. Y'all want to dethrone the Miata? Let's go do it. I don't know why we want to dethrone the Miata though, because it ain't hurt nobody. So I guess this really wasn't a good joke. Aside from that, I really think that if you are someone who is aiming for a light, fun sports car or sporty car, y'all know I can't get that shit right. If you're looking for something to that degree, then the MG Midget is something that is worth looking at. Once again, I want to thank you guys for taking a look into this video, and if you haven't already, go check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about the Midget. Have you ever heard of it before? Or if it's just something that you are like, why the f did I make this video? So with that being said, until the next video, I will see you guys later.